Architect Divya Chakravarti. She completed her undergraduate studies from SRM University and she went on to pursue her master's in historic preservation and urbanism and study of the built environment from the University of California, Los Angeles. She went on to work for the Department of Planning and Preservation for the city of Pasadena, California. She also did a brief stint of work for Historic Scotland, Edinburgh, UK. She had also worked on conservation projects like Kalsa Mahal, Gokhale Hall in Chennai, and Marimalappa Educational Trust in Mysore. She is currently working as a director of Samrakshan Heritage Consultancy. She is also a co-founder of the Artisan Reprisal of Traditional Materials, Method and Technology. She goes on to conduct workshops to revive traditional and lost methods of construction.
Welcome to the UGC lecture series for Bachelors of Architecture. The subject we are discussing is environmental science. The topic we will be delving into is environment, ecosystems and biodiversity. In this lecture, we will be looking into conservation of biodiversity, importance of communities in conservation practices. If you look at community conservation, it is very important to realize that let it be any part of the habitable area of, let it be animal species or plant species, human beings, even though are detracting from it at a rapid pace, they are the only ones who can even ensure that certain species can be preserved or conserved. So, any conservation process has to involve the immediate community for it to be a long living process, a sustainable process, an educated process in the sense. So, if people are not educated about the process of conservation, the importance of biodiversity, the conservation principles and methods are going to fail. We will look at certain examples where certain communities have come in together and actually preserved and conserved certain biodiversification elements or animals or birds. In this case, we are looking at people protecting pelicans. This is in Kokkare Bellur, which is a village situated in Mandya district of Karnataka. For generations here, storks and pelicans have been coming and roosting on the trees in the village for 6 months. They breed here, feed in the water bodies spread within a distance of few kilometers and then fly away to their summer grounds. The villagers consider them to be a good omen and a harbinger of good rain and protected their habitat. Villagers have also established an orphanage for injured birds. This area would prove to be an excellent community managed reserve. So, this is very crucial. If it is going to be an enforced method of conservation with just laws and protection by policies, so they are meant to be broken, you will still have certain factors that are not encompassed in that process. But when an immediate community, whole entire community is participating like we have just seen, there is no way this process can fail, because it is the people themselves who are involved in this and the people who are aware of the importance of these birds and the migratory birds and what they actually can provide to the environment. These are the people who are involved in the village. Usually a village is considered a place of lack of education or lack of awareness, but it is only in this village that these pelicans feel safe, and they have actually increased in number each year. More number of birds come in, they migrate, and these people actually look after them and await for the period of the migration. This is the Pasagonova Pond. This is a potential community reserve. In the Pilibhit district of Uttar Pradesh lies 1 hectare village pond which is protected by the local people, and this has become home to several migratory waterfowl. The people have traditionally protected these birds, and there is a community enforced ban on hunting and poaching of birds from the pond. Although small in area, this pond provides an example of traditional respect for wildlife through community enforced bans on hunting and poaching. Further, because of the protection offered to the birds here, This pond teems with bird life in the winter. Huge signboards listing birds seen in this area indicate that this pond hosts a number of migratory waterfowl. Joint forest management. This is the Kuvarai village in Andhra Pradesh, where it's a combination of the government as well as community, which is the best possible combination. Because if it's solely going to be the community alone, they will not have the backup or the strength or the power within them to enforce punishment or enforce certain fines. The government has the power to do so, and the community needs to be involved to create an active awareness for the same situation. Ex situ conservation that can happen with respect to the community, captive breeding and species reintroduction, NBAGR, NBPGR, biotechnology, seed banks and bioinformatics. Bioinformatics and computational biology are often used interchangeably. This involves the use of techniques including applied mathematics, informatics, statistics, computer science and biochemistry to solve biological problems, usually on a molecular level. For an example is genome sequencing. So, bioinformatics actually has an understanding of the entire system. Even though it is going to be in the level of an individual cell or genome sequencing, you can see the extent to which it can have an impact. Biomolecules, DNA, RNA, proteins, signaling networks, cells, organisms, the final clinician and the environment. So, all of these are different levels at which bioinformatics plays a role. This is a typical DNA molecule, and all of that is going to be seen in the different gene banks, seed banks. All of this is supported by a very good infrastructure in bioinformatics and suitable people working in the field. This is another example of how species reintroduction can help in a particular area. This is the Dudhwa rhino reintroduction. The Dudhwa forests were actually home to one horned rhino nearly a century and a half ago, but due to rampant poaching for its valuable horn and for game hunting, it has been wiped out from the area by late 19th century. Rhinos were successfully then reintroduced to Dudhwa on April 1st, 1984, following a systematic reintroduction effort of captive bred stock. Suitable habitats were first earmarked prior to this reintroduction process. About 27 square kilometers of grasslands and open forests with perennial source of water was earmarked as rhino reintroduction area, and 2 monitoring stations have been established. Currently, there are 7 rhinos breeding successfully, 4 adult females, 1 adult male and 2 sub-adult males. So, the importance of reintroduction is very crucial. As and when a species is extremely dwindling and say it is there in a couple of zoos, this whole process of reintroduction has to begin, because in most cases, most species, captive breeding is very rare. It has to be enforced, it has to be done under certain particular conditions. So, as and when a species is becoming endangered or close to extinction, it has to be studied, and reintroduction does take time. It is not an overnight process. It is not like, okay, in this area now there are only 2 tigers, let us bring 3 tigers from the zoo and drop it over here. It cannot be done like that. It has to be done with a lot of study. The habitat has to be first made similar, and the climate has to be made similar gradually. Let it be a zoo or a wildlife sanctuary or a national park. All of these steps are going to be gradual, taking a couple of years at least. So, the steps have to be gradually done, and like it was done successfully for these rhinos, it can be done for other species as well. This is Dudhwa Lakshmipur Kheri. This particular area, now you can see thriving rhinos, and before a species can be reintroduced, the habitat has to be made suitable for its consumption of food and fodder. For example, here Dudhwa, it had to be grasslands and it had to be suitable species for rhinos. But if it was going to be a secondary carnivore like a tiger or a panther, even other animals like antlers and deers would have to be reintroduced in that particular area for that transition of that secondary carnivore to be smooth and problem free. Project Tiger. This is a success in species conservation. Tiger population has declined drastically from estimates around 4 lakh at the turn of the century to 1800 by the 1970s. This led in 1973 to the initiation of the Project Tiger with the objective of conserving and rescuing this species from annihilation. 23 tiger reserves were set up along with the imposition of a total ban on hunting and trading in tiger products at national as well as international levels, and the implementation of habitat improvement and anti-poaching measures. Between 73 to 89, the species has showed a marked recovery, resulting in an increase in numbers to more than 4,000 by the year of 1989. So, these numbers might seem small actually. Where is 4,000 with respect to actually having a particular species in mind in an entire country, when we are talking about thousands and lakhs a few years ago. But what happens is, the process of conservation is very gradual, but it has to be steady and in a positive direction. So, as and when we notice a particular drop or decline in a species, stringent measures have to be taken, and we cannot wait for the situation to become drastic or where the species becomes extinct except in zoos or other captive environment. Project Tiger has been successful not only in our country, but in other countries have also come upon and looked upon this as a case study to study how this process can be done and replicated for other species as well. But even though the process has been done entirely in our country, there has been a lot of international influence and help, funding, as well as the technical know-how of how it can be done, and the implementation of the stringent poaching laws is very crucial. Irrespective of Project Tiger happening, there are still certain hunters and poachers hunting these animals down. What are the efforts from the Indian front? The Biodiversity Bill, which was passed in 2002, India became party to Convention on Biodiversity. May 22nd has been marked as the International Day on Biodiversity. Conservation approaches, international treaties. Various treaties have helped conserve bio. A major one is CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, which was prepared in 1973. This pretty much bans international trade and transport of body parts of endangered organisms. But in spite of this treaty being signed in 73, there is still an entire smuggling ring in the industries of in the billions of dollars dealing with endangered species as well as the transport and body parts of these species. What are the different conservation approaches? Captive breeding. Many endangered species have been now bred in zoos. The zoo is basically to protect these animals from poaching, to boost populations, as well as reintroduce them gradually into a wild that has again been protected. This has worked so far for the California condor. This is the photograph of the condor. So, its imprints are there on the bird and not humans. But this is worthless if there is not adequate habitat left in the wild. Say we have only zoos, it is not sufficient. We need to have adequate wildlife habitat for these animals to be then later released to, and that habitat should be suitable for these species. If man is going to go on destroying different forests and grasslands, that is not going to be possible. Biodiversity hotspots and recognizing them. A hotspot, like we discussed, is an area that supports an especially high number of species endemic to that particular area found nowhere else in the world. Conservation approaches, umbrella species. When an habitat is preserved to meet the needs of an umbrella species, it helps preserve habitat for many other species. So, primary species actually serves as an umbrella for others. Large species with large home ranges like tigers and other top predators are good umbrella species. Like we discussed, if a secondary carnivore has to be reintroduced in a particular area in the wild, before the carnivore is going to be reintroduced, primary carnivores and secondary herbivores and certain plants have to be reintroduced in that habitat for a couple of months, so they can set up a suitable food chain amongst themselves, and then the secondary carnivore can be reintroduced. So our flagship species or charismatic species that win public affection like that of the panda. Now, if you look at the different economic incentives that can be provided, different approaches of conservation. The first approach is debt for nature swaps. These are financial transactions in which a portion of a developing nation's foreign debt is forgiven in exchange for local investments in environmental conservation measures. The concept of debt for nature swap was first conceived by Thomas Lovejoy of the World Wildlife Fund in 1984 as an opportunity to deal with the problems of developing nation indebtedness and its consequent deleterious effect on environment. So, like we just even saw, India as such has one of the largest endemic species in the world. It's one of the largest holder of hotspots in the world, but we are a developing country. Can we afford to actually invest money from our hard-earned GDP towards conservation of species? However important it is, when we have other important problems like poverty, hunger and education, these do take a back step. We do realize the importance of biodiversity. So, it is only then the United Nations came up with this program, which will help developing nations and underdeveloped nations to actually provide for a safe habitat for such species. It could be plant, animal, birds, insects, anything. But when they provide for a suitable environment for this, provide for conservation measures for this, their foreign debt, a percentage of it is forgiven, which helps these countries in the longer run. Conservation concessions are management contracts between a government or a community landowner and a conservation minded buyer. They offer a novel way for green activists to compete directly with timber firms seeking to lease rights to land. So, this is another way of actually having where you lease out the land, so you do not lose control of the land. The byproducts of the land, trees cannot be felled during the period of lease. Their products may be used, but they cannot be cut down or destroyed. So, this is very important, because it cannot go without saying that yes, we are going to continue to depend on forests and other aspects of biodiversity, let it be plants, animals or any other creature, but at the rate at which we take from them has to be controlled, and at the same time research has to be done to find out alternate methods of rather than utilizing these resources. And once those alternate methods are utilized, then the dependency on these natural resources of biodiversity will gradually reduce and we can concentrate on conserving them. And once it reaches an impasse, that is the demand meets supply, then we do not have to worry. It is only when demand and supply is so far apart and in between, the difference is so far apart that it become crucial for humans to intervene and help protect and conserve biodiversity. So, we all have to be proud of our biodiversity and try in all possible ways to preserve it. At the end of this lecture, we have looked into conservation of biodiversity, the different types of conservation we have seen. We have seen the importance of in situ conservation versus ex situ, what are the differences between these two types of conservation principles and how it can actually be adapted within the Indian context. Then we have moved on to see the importance of community participation in these different conservation practices. The most crucial element of any conservation measure with respect to biodiversity is the community and the people involved. If it is going to be a sole attempt by the government, by legislation and by the law, it is not going to be felt in the real sense, because it's going to be only done on paper and not finally utilized or established. Versus if it's going to be done solely by the community, like we have seen in a couple of cases in this lecture, you can expect a lot of results because it's the people who are involved directly. But what happens with respect to people who do not follow it, that is where community participation completely loses out. So it has to be a combination of community participation along with legislative help for law and order to ensure that different conservation approaches, different conservation practices to help have a sustainable biodiversified life is very crucial. So at the end of this lecture, we should be able to answer the following questions. What is bioinformatics? What economic incentives can be provided to aid in conservation of biodiversity? Define the following: A. Captive breeding, B. Umbrella species. Discuss the work of Project Tiger. That brings us to the end of this lecture. Thank you.